This is Mike Montero.
I'm Erica Hall.
This is Larisa Berger. We're broadcasting from Mule Design Studio in beautiful North Beach, San Francisco.
This is Voice of Design.
Hello.
Larisa?
Yes. Hi.
What?
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 Welcome to The Voice of Design.
America's most podcast. I don't know. We have a guest.
Our heater's still broken.
This...
They came and fixed it. They put in a new motor.
You're getting exactly the content that you paid for, people.
Because it's free.
And the explanation of jokes is coming as well. This is Mike.
And I'm Larisa Berger. And today...
we have a very special guest today. We have Dave Dylan Thomas.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we met at we met in Copenhagen.
Yes.
At a conference.
UX Copenhagen, yeah.
Early this year. It was freezing.
Yes. Even for Copenhagen, they told me it was cold.
It was like -4 or something.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Which is nothing compared to
Celsius?
Chicago right now, but...
Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Celsius.
Okay, and then I don't know what that is.
It's very cold.
Yeah.
Very cold. I mean, it's cold everywhere. I don't know if it'll be cold when this comes out. Who knows? Who even knows if this is going to come out? This is the mood I'm in today.
What? This is the East Coast edition of VOD.
What do you mean?
You are both from Philly,
yeah.
right? And I'm from New Jersey.
Oh.
Yeah, she's from New Jersey.
Yeah, it is very cold where we're all from right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
But
here we are in California.
This is much better.
In beautiful, cloudy North Beach.
It's like 50
in
out
our
there.
bunker,
Yeah.
where the heat stopped working this week.
Yeah, it did. But it's 50.
Yeah, it's not that
you
bad
really
at all.
can't complain.
It's like one more sweater.
You can't get on a podcast that's going to be heard across the country, including in places where it's below freezing.
Yeah, I know.
And talk about how uncomfortable you are because the heater broke and it's 50 outside.
Yeah, but now it's clear that I've definitely become a San Franciscan.
I am so sorry that you had to wear a light sweater today.
I'm just fascinated by how it keeps breaking. That's the engineering side of me. It's more
keeps
about
breaking?
that. I don't understand how it works, the heater.
Well, at some point today,
we'll take it apart
somebody's
again.
going to show up here. And anyway, we should really talk to Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, we met in Copenhagen.
Yes.
You were talking about cognitive bias, correct?
Yes, and how it influences design.
How? Tell us.
What is cognitive bias?
There you go.
Sure. So
let's pretend that nobody in tech knows anything about cognitive bias.
Yes, let's pretend.
Let's pretend
that. So cognitive bias, and for clarification, I will not pretend to be a social scientist. I'm more of a fan who is, obsessively studied cognitive bias. But at the end of the day, your mind takes shortcuts just to get through the day. Like in any given day, your mind will go through, let's say, 1 trillion decisions. Even like right now, I'm deciding where to put my gaze and where to move my hands and what words to come out of my mouth. And if I thought carefully about every single one of those decisions, I would just, dissolve into a puddle of goo. I would never get anything done. So for the most part, our mind goes on autopilot for those kinds of things. And it's great. Except when you have officer-involved shootings or gender bias in hiring, like that's when the shortcuts become harmful. And that's cognitive bias, is sort of when that heuristic is, or that decision-making process turns into something that's actually causing problems.
Mm-hmm.
So is your brain just saying, let's do the thing we've always done in this situation?
Yes. Yeah. So for a little background here, I became kind of obsessed with cognitive bias after a talk by Iris Binet at South by Southwest about gender bias and how it boils down to a lot of pattern recognition. So if I'm hiring for a, web developer, and in my head, when I think web developer, I think, skinny white dude with a goatee, but I see a name at the top of that resume that doesn't match that. Even if I'm not explicitly anti-woman, in the back of my head, I'm still going to be a little more skeptical when I read that. And when she sort of pointed out that pattern recognition, something as basic as that, is responsible for so much injustice. I'm like, I need to learn everything I can about cognitive bias.
And cognitive bias is really hard to measure, right?
Oh, yeah, very difficult. You can see its results, right? And you can kind of measure those, but it's not the sort of thing where I can like point at your brain and be like, oh, you're cognitive biasing right now, right?
Right. And even like noticing it kind of introduces doubt. Or isn't that related to the Hawthorne effect, or am I conflating?
So I'm not familiar with the
concepts?
Hawthorne effect, but what I can tell you is that there is
Wait a minute. What's the Hawthorne effect then? You introduce something into the room, you got to explain it.
All right.
Because I don't know what it is either.
The Hawthorne effect is like the act of observing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a physics version of it too, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Heisenberg
You can't, if you try to
principle,
look at an electron,
And
you're
that-
actually going to change what you're trying to measure about it.
Which is also tied to Schrodinger's cat, which
Yes.
some dude decided to freaking mansplain to Zach, and he was just like, okay.
How do you mansplain Schrodinger's cat? By the way, that's the title of this episode.
by not really understanding physics, but feeling like you could get it if you just acted confidently enough. It's funny because people explain things to Zach thinking he's the one in tech because he's a tall white dude, but he's just a liberal arts major, you know?
He's the one with
bias right there.
feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the bias right there. There is this thing called the actor-observer effect, and I love it because it's a story about Clever Hans. Clever Hans was a horse that apparently could count, right, and do math. So you would say, Clever Hans, tell me what's 2
Mike is
plus
intrigued.
2, right? And Clever Hans would clomp his foot 4 times and say, oh, what's 4 plus 3? And it would clomp 7 times and stop, right? And everyone was like, this is amazing. And so some social scientists got in the room, started looking at this more carefully, and they watched. And what they realized was when Clever Hans started to get close to the right number, the body language of his owner would change just ever so slightly. But Hans, being clever, picked up on this and stopped when he got to the number that was pleasing its owner. And the way they could tell
Oh my gosh,
is
that's the best cognitive bias story I've ever heard.
It's crazy, right?
The owner had a tell.
Yes, exactly. And horses can tell tells.
Yeah, they've got high emotional intelligence, not necessarily like math intelligence.
You know what I found out is totally unrelated. By the way, we go on tons of tangents.
Oh no, this is how I operate.
And we did cut him off. I cut him off.
You cut him off.
Yeah, that's my bad.
Yeah, we call that.
I'll get a demerit for this episode.
So, Dave, I'm hiring an engineer.
Yes.
In my mind, I'm not even thinking about this, but I've got a picture in my head of what an engineer looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that picture come from?
TV, your own life experience, stories you've heard, like all the usual suspects, right?
So like central casting of the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm thinking hunched over, slightly pudgy, 25-year-old, cannot make eye contact with you. And so I start hiring, and the minute that person shows up, does something happen to my brain? Is it like there's a match?
Yeah, your brain says thank you. Your brain says, I don't like uncertainty. And you giving me a picture of someone who matches the task I need to perform gives me certainty. Thank you so much. Let's just stop now, right? Don't show me anyone else. I finally found what the pattern I was like. You know, like that memory game where you had to like flip things over and find matches? It's like that.
Yeah.
It's like your brain is always trying to do that. And when it finds a match, it's like, thank you. We can stop now. Good night.
So, well, wait, first of all, without leading you, is this a problem?
If you benefit from this, it is not a problem. It's awesome, right? If I am the pudgy white, nerdy guy with who can't make eye contact, the world is my oyster, because if I want to be a developer, that is exactly what the world thinks a developer looks like. If I am in any other group and I want to be a developer, I now have a problem.
Okay, so this is a problem.
Yes.
We're not even, we were joking a little bit, but I've talked to a bunch of people. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who, she's a lady, and she's an engineer, and she keeps being offered internships. And she's been doing this for like 7-8 years.
Wow.
She's very, very good at engineering. But the minute that she shows up for a job interview, they're like, oh, intern.
Yeah. And there's a destructive loop. I talking with a real social scientist about this on my podcast the other day around if you have a job that someone expects basically a white person to get and not a black person to get. The black person walks in the room and, tries to get the job. The white interviewer starts to react as if the black person is having a bad interview. The black person having that experience now thinks they're doing badly and starts behaving badly. And you get this vicious circle going where the interview just falls apart. And they've scientifically studied this and had people come in and have a white interviewee come in and suddenly, oh, they're being treated better. And so they think the interview is going better. And so the interview does go better. That kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah, this is a big issue with music auditions, which is part of why blind auditions started happening for orchestras.
Absolutely. And the same approach is being taken now around some of these tech jobs. So City of Philadelphia recently started trying out a blind hiring approach for developers. And what they would do is they would literally print out the resume, have someone who is not involved in the hiring process take a magic marker and redact it by hand, because even in tech, that's actually the most effective way to blind a resume. And the problem they ran into actually was as soon as you go to, let's say you find someone you like, as soon as you go to look at their GitHub profile, oh, wait, now I see all their personal information.
Yeah.
So they actually wrote a script, I think it was like a Chrome plugin, that as soon as the GitHub profile started to load, it pulled out all the personal identifying information. And then to complete the circle, they put that code back up on GitHub so anybody can use it. It's actually there now if anyone wants to try this out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's actually what I did when I would give resumes to my boss at my first job, because we totally had that problem.
We also,
redacting the name can go really far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're guilty of it when we write those postings.
How so?
We're looking for a rock star ninja to crush some code.
Sure. Yeah.
You know exactly what you're looking for when you write that posting.
That's a good point.
And then it shows up.
Yeah.
Or I should say he shows up.
Yeah.
Various he's show up, and they look like rock star ninjas ready to crush some code.
Yeah. It's coded into how we create that communication. And what's interesting, the reason I would encourage anybody who's really in any hiring position to at least try this approach is, so I work at a think company, and we tried this out with our development apprenticeship. And I talked to the people who worked on it, and what they say they learned was not just that it's really, really hard to do, but also you learn very quickly what you actually care about when you're hiring for that position. So one of the people working on it told me, I had to start blinding the names of the companies these people worked at because that was influencing me. It's like, oh, you used to work at Facebook. I suddenly think, you must be better than this person who worked at a company I never heard of before. Of course, that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah.
All I really need to know is what skill, you are, able to perform. Yeah. Which company you did it at can actually be it can be noise, right? It can be a false positive for skill. And that was something they didn't even realize they had a bias around until they started trying out this process.
That's interesting.
You mentioned that they thought this was hard.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the problem here is just that we're inherently lazy?
Oh, what I've learned by studying cognitive bias is that thinking is hard. Our brains can only do so much of it in a given day. So any opportunity it has to not do that work, it will say, thank you, let's move on. And it's interesting because it's not that we are incapable of thoughtful practice in anything. Mm-hmm. Have you seen people try to order a latte? But it's where we choose to spend that energy, right? Do I choose to spend it on ordering that latte, or do I choose to spend it on really looking carefully at, do I pull my gun out when I see this black person in this car in this neighborhood? Right?
Yeah.
That is not a thing that a lot of thought necessarily gets put into. And what's interesting is in the cases where there are certain police precincts that have seen big drops in officer-involved shootings, the training that has led to that is very often about stopping and thinking before you act, slowing down, the training to slow down those interactions instead of training to escalate those interactions. When we can actually slow down and think about something, we're actually pretty good at making decisions. It's when we're tired, when we're rushed, when we're angry, when we're scared, that's when all hell breaks loose.
When the tech we use every day is destroying all those processes.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's just too many choices to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like your brain loves certainty, and any opportunity you have, any opportunity design provides to make an easy decision, your brain thanks you for.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're moving fast. We're breaking things.
Mm-hmm.
The old Facebook motto.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we fix this? Because we're being lazy.
Yeah.
Like we're making little brain shortcuts, and it's hurting people.
Yeah.
It's hurting people's ability to get a job. People are getting shot.
Oh, yeah.
So this is obviously something we want to fix.
Yeah. And the fixing it, first, I think it comes with an acknowledgement that cognitive bias is not something you fix, it's something you leverage. And what I mean by that is you don't get rid of it.
Okay.
Because you don't get rid of those shortcuts. Like I said, if we had to think carefully about every single decision we had to make, nothing happens, right? So it's a question of, I usually think about it from two directions. One is, are there existing biases that we can actually leverage for good? And an example of that would be the very sad fact that if something rhymes, we actually think it's more true.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an example of using that for good. So if you look at the fact that most African Americans do not trust health information that comes from the government, the numbers on it are just horrible. And this would be the topic of a whole other podcast. Very reasonable, right, that distrust exists.
Yeah.
But this is information that could help save lives. How do you make it more trustworthy? Maybe you make it rhyme.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And that sounds embarrassing and stupid and weird, but it works. It straight up works. I'll give the federal government good credit for this. There are, in fact, there's a Plain Language Act of 2010, 2011 that actually says if you are a website getting federal money for that website to promote some kind of service for your constituents, you must use plain language. Here's what we mean by plain language. Like, you have to do that. If you are trying to offer a service, you need to make it easy for people to understand the service. Like, those are the kinds of sort of institutional things that are leveraging a very basic bias around how we consume information.
Yeah.
What does the government mean by plain language?
So check out 18F sometime. They have fantastic guidelines around what is and isn't plain language. The UK was really forward-looking on this. They have a whole service design component to their government. And again, they have very clear instructions around clear language and what that means and what has to be there in order for people to understand and use it. And they arrived at it in a very similar fashion to good old-fashioned, human-centered design. Let's talk to people. Let's find out what they understand. Let's design in a way. I mean, none of these fixes.
Yeah, GitHub repository to follow because they actually talk about interesting things.
Yeah, that's the other thing. They're on GitHub.
I'm going to miss the UK.
City of Oakland content guidelines are on GitHub.
Yeah,
like you
cool.
can request changes through GitHub if you find something wrong with their guidelines.
Wow.
Like, that's the kind of stuff, at least at the governmental level, like I feel like is nudging in the right direction. Because ultimately, and this is where it becomes really dangerous, right? Those guidelines become defaults. And once you have a default set, it's really hard to undo it because that's certainty, that's ease, right?
And we're lazy.
Yeah, exactly. That's why public policy is so hard to undo. Once it's set, that becomes the default. It's so much easier to just go with it or make shortcuts around it than it is to ever try to change it. So we have to be super careful, right, about the things that we create that become the defaults.
You just scared the hell out of me for 2020, by the way.
Oh, so not to put too fine a point on it. So 2020 will be, sadly, only the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote. There would be so much significance, right, in a female president getting elected then. But going back to that thing about defaults, the thing pushing so hard against that is, if I look at a visual list of presidents, what do they all have in common? What pattern do I have to break to walk into a voting booth and say yes to this?
Yeah.
I maintain that probably the greatest contribution Obama had as president was being a black man on nightly news who was not a criminal or a celebrity. Because for the longest time, if you turned on the nightly news and you saw a black person on the news, it was a criminal, right? Or maybe it was Michael Jordan or Prince, right? Like, those were your options. And think about the impact that has when you hear about an officer-involved shooting, right? Oh, of course they shot the black guy because black guy equals criminal. I see that every night. All of a sudden, for 8 straight years, the black person you see on TV is the most powerful person on the planet.
And there's kids who grew up with that.
Yeah, my kid was born in December of 2008 and spent the first 8 years of his life with the most powerful man in the world looking very much like him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, that I still well up thinking about that.
Yeah, this is gonna make me cry. Like,
I'm so glad we fixed racism.
I know, right?
Good job. High fives all around.
But I will bet cash money that you don't get the Black Lives Matter movement without that, because it's not like people weren't shooting Black people before that. It's that people didn't care until it seemed a little weird that Black people were getting shot, because, oh, wait, Black doesn't necessarily equal criminal. Right. It could mean the president of the United States. Wait, why did that guy get shot again? Right? I feel like that it's no coincidence that the Black Lives Matter comes along toward the end of Obama's presidency.
So we broke a cognitive pattern.
Yes, that's part of the fix, is to, and this is why it takes so damn long. Like, took 8 years of the most powerful person on the planet being Black, but we got there, right? So yeah, that's another thing, is establishing different patterns. Like, I know with our son, one of the things that we, want to get away from is how he perceives women, right? We want to be very thoughtful around that. And when we realized at a certain point, he was asking us about female scientists, and even and my wife is a cognitive, is a pediatric neuropsychologist, right? She is a female scientist. Neither of us could really name more than 2 or 3 female scientists like Marie Curie. And as soon as we realized that, it was like, okay, we are buying a book that is chock full of female scientists, and at reading time every night, we are going to read one of them. We are going to set up a pattern, right? So that when he thinks woman, he thinks scientist. When he thinks scientists, he thinks woman. So part of it is, again, like hijacking that bias to say, look, you're going to have a default. I can't stop that, but let's make it a positive default, right?
So how do we hijack the hiring default? If I'm a well-meaning yet lazy, because I'm a human being, hiring manager at a big company, and I thought I'd been doing a great job, and then I turn around and I see my 85% white male team behind me, and I'm thinking, help me, Dave. What can I do? How should I start?
So there's 2 things, right? There's this notion of blind hiring, which requires dedication and experimentation. And there's already great resources out there around how, because people have been trying this for a while now, and they've learned things.
Okay, so number 1, you got to commit to doing the work. Yes. This is going to take work. You're not here to offer easy. We're not going to Marie Kondo this shit.
Oh my gosh!
I can't give you.
Why must we?
Stop! Just don't.
Why must we mess with Marie Kondo? She's fabulous.
She's great. Okay.
Yeah. Her process is nothing but thoughtful. So I am not sure what you were
Larisa,
trying to point out.
How do bathrooms, kitchens, garages, and everything else in the world fit in one category?
They don't fit in one category.
Yeah. She's got.
It's not by room. That's the whole point. She's introducing a new information architecture for possession.
Category 1 is clothes. Category 2 is paper. I forget what category 3 is. But then category 4 is miscellaneous, which includes your garage, kitchen, bathroom, and everything else.
So I think you're seeing this problem in a flipped way, right? It's like you're assuming that the house should be filled with all of these things and we should have big houses. I think she's pushing against that.
Anyway, one of us interrupted Dave. It's going to be hard. Yeah.
And you have to want it, right? This is the same with any institutional change.
Okay.
Right.
I also blame Aaron Sorkin for this, by the way, because Social Network just made this worse, that movie.
How so?
Because every scene they had of programmers was a single dude with headphones on. And that was the myth. And I don't know if it still is, but at least at that time, I was trying to get programming jobs. And startups were very much thinking like, no. The whole thing is I get one dude in a corner and then money happens. And I feel like that movie I really did enjoy, but I was so disappointed at how they really made that so public. Because it need not be the case. And there's lots of other ways to make software, and pair programming is like really helpful for debunking that. But at that time was still a battle to say like, hey, you're going to have 2 people doing this work together.
It goes deeper, right? So I want to say it was in the early 80s when they started trying to market computers to kids. And there's this shift from sort of universal, this is for the whole family, to this is for boys.
That's
right. We're going to market this to boys, right? That had a very big impact for decades to come because think about it. Those kids then grew up to be the programmers to then just, again, be careful of your defaults, then just market the same things to other people who looked like them.
Yeah.
So you have to very actively, you have to really want it and be willing to say, I am going to spend money on this. As soon as you really, the way you know a company cares about something is when they spend money on it, like real money, when they leave money on the table about a thing where they could be making more money if they did it the way that they used to, but they don't. That's when you know they care about it. So if a company says, look, it's going to take us, we're going to have to hire slower now, right? That's when you know they cares, because most companies are concerned with growth, right? We need to grow fast. How do we grow fast? Well, part of it is we need to hire people. We need to hire them fast. If we're hiring, remember, fast equals lazy and quick and biased. Slow means thoughtful. If you slow down your hiring process, that means you care more about hiring good and diverse people than you do about making money. Like that, it really comes down to that. But that's part of what you have to do, is to say, we're going to slow that down. And then if you really, 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 really care about it, you have to realize, even if you do blind hiring, it's still a rigged game, because the people applying for that job have already gone through so many barriers. They got a college education. Okay, boom, I've already knocked out God knows how many people of color and how many, even women, right? They've already gotten through high school. I've knocked out a whole bunch of people. They're talking now about how around third or fourth grade, if you haven't started working on it by then, you're going to lose most of them, right? That's how bad it is. That's how early you have to think about that stuff. So the early steps, I'd say, are things like blind resumes. Let's at least stop using gender and race to disqualify people. But even once you do that, the pool that you're hiring from has to be bigger. And that's a much longer game. That's you investing in saying, oh, we need to talk about the public school system, right? We need to talk about third rail issues like that before we really start fixing things.
And I would argue that in Silicon Valley too, where there's kind of so much excitement over not caring about people if they did CS or whatever in college, that in a way they're also correcting back to their bias. Because instead of that being addressed by schools who are like admitting more people and getting those educations, then you go out in the world and it's like, oh yeah, those educations aren't worth anything anymore. You're like, great.
Yeah.
This was my way of blending in this new group of people and being accepted because I had a credential, and now the credential's being thrown out. So I feel like people are maybe nervous about making assumptions or about taking risks in hiring. And then it's also that bias makes them feel better about that risk.
You know, the whole we don't even have to go to college movement in Silicon Valley is like the most privileged thing. Like, check it out. I don't even have to get a college degree. I got it made.
Yeah.
We need to rethink that whole like college is stupid thing. College is expensive as hell. I mean, there's 1,000 problems
with college.
But Silicon Valley's whole you don't need to go to college thing is just another sign of their own douchiness.
Yeah, there was that Paul Graham quote about how there was a moment when he would just give funding to anybody who walked in with a hoodie and looked like Mark Zuckerberg, because it was just crazy how successful that had been, and he felt silly for having missed it. So then he noticed later on his own bias towards that archetype.
Yeah, we love patterns, right? We love being able to pin success on one little thing, right? Because that makes, again, it makes life easy, right? I don't have to be thoughtful and talk to people and understand things. I can just say, oh, he's wearing a hoodie. Great. By the way, that's funny because hoodie there means something very different than it means for other people who have hoodies.
Absolutely.
It's amazing the life that a hoodie has depending on who buys it.
Yeah.
I'm either going to give you a ton of money or I'm going to shoot you for being in the wrong place.
Yeah. And the line is so thin. But that and you know, to bring it back to design, like, I mean, that's our stock in trade is symbols, right? Design works because symbols work and patterns, right? Like, we can't, you know, as user experience professionals, we cannot create anything lest there be a pattern that we can predict the user's going to understand.
Yeah, we count on people doing the same thing over and over and over again. Right. We put things in places where people have shown us they'll go to again and again and again.
Yep. Where do I look for careers when I come to a website, right? Upper right, footer, right? Like, that's a pattern. That's a bias, right?
Yeah.
And if we didn't have that, every time we designed a website, we have to say, okay, let's interview 1,000 people and find out where they like to look for careers.
Absolutely, yeah. But that's also a good point. Where people are pulling from will also impact the pool that they get, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the investment is you can default to the places you usually look for people, or you can spend time and money and effort into looking places that you're not used to looking.
Yeah.
And even the way, to your point about like the we were looking for a rock star ninja. So I have a friend who was doing some hiring. Alex Hillman over at Indie Hall in Philly was doing some hiring around a position that was fairly unique. And his approach was not, in fact, to create a job description and post up and say, hey, you try to match this. He had a series of questions that were things like, you know, what can you tell me about Indie Hall, right? Or what, you know, where are you like in your career? Like just very sort of almost weird, vague kind of questions, but ended up giving him a much better signal to noise ratio because the questions were based on what the job was ultimately going to like ask of that person and then the value it would have for that person. And that ended up being a much better match and pull from a much more diverse group than if he had just gone to, you know, Indeed and put up the tagged, you know, job description that was only ever going to be seen by this same set of people who always see that job description. Even changing the approach to hiring can open up that pool in big, bad ways.
All right. So there's stuff that the people doing the hiring can do. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
They got to want to do it. All right. Now, how do we solve the problem from the other side? People applying.
Yeah.
So one of the things I see a lot is people looking at a job posting and convincing themselves, this isn't for me. There's 8 qualifications on here that it says I have to have. I only have 6. This isn't for me.
Yeah.
How do we convince people to see through the bias of the job application and go ahead and apply for that job? Or by doing that, are we setting them up to fail?
So I think that, first of all, if someone hired us, you know, to design a resume, right? Or design a job hiring flow, a service design job. I want you to design a job flow for people, for engineers. And we were to come back to them and say, okay, part of this job flow is you need to educate the people who are applying, right, who are using this product to disregard the actual content you're pushing out about that product. We'd laugh ourselves out of the room, right? Like I tend to say that the burden of proof is on the person creating the job.
I absolutely 1000% agree with you. Meanwhile, people need jobs.
Oh, sure. And there are, in fact, like self-serving biases that do split a bit along gender around stuff like that, where a man might look at a job like that and say, yeah, I can do that, right? Regardless of whether or not they're even remotely qualified. There's actually several, Dunning-Kruger, there's all sorts of biases actually around thinking you're better at a thing than you actually are. I don't know that you want to encourage that necessarily, but that's you are going to attract people. Like that's the problem you're describing. You're going to attract people who do have overconfidence bias. Those are the people who are not going to be deterred by stuff like that.
Can we just call these people men?
Yes, generally speaking, that's who they are.
Yeah,
like that tends to be. There's actually all sorts of weird gender splits when it comes to self-confidence biases, but yes, that is in fact who will probably be hiring for that stuff. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know that there's a good way to code something to train. I mean, I get very conflicted about this because I do, for example, like I do like speaker training, and I talk to people about how to be more confident when they give talks or when they even have to present their designs. And it gets tricky because I can say, here are some things that have worked for me. But if I'm giving that instruction to a woman, I have to be very real with her and say, look, it would be stupid of me to tell you that when I walk in that room and I'm giving a presentation and I'm using these techniques, that the person watching me give a talk is not aware that I'm a man, and that is in no way influencing how much confidence they think I'm exuded, how much they think they should be listening to me. So understand that the techniques I'm telling you about right now are no substitute for, or in no way going to necessarily mitigate the fact that you are already going to be at a disadvantage for a lot of the rooms you're walking into, because a lot of the rooms you're walking into, the people in the room already have a bias that they shouldn't really, even your voice, they might start to have a bias against, because that's a thing that people have been coded and patterned to. And it's terrible. So that, and the reason I bring that up is to sort of say, I can train you and say, look, when you see this job description, 3 out of 4 things there, don't even worry about that. Here's the problem they're actually trying to solve. And you need to pitch them as solving that problem. They won't even care whether you can actually do these other things, because I'll tell you, all your male counterparts, that's how they're pitching themselves, right? At the same time, I'm basically having to tell you how to play a rigged game. And I don't feel great about that. But to your point, people need jobs.
Right.
But I have to feel like, okay, this is the Band-Aid, right? This is the blind resume Band-Aid until we get to the point where, oh no, people really do have a better pool to hire from. People really have better patterns set up in their head. That's the long game. But the short game, to your point, it may be a lot about saying, look, here's the game, here's how it's rigged, here's how to hack it.
Well, this may be part of fixing the rigged game, because, you know, the biggest excuse that I hear from people is, oh, I can only hire the people who show up.
That old chestnut, yeah.
Right. So we got to talk people into showing up.
Yeah.
You got anything you want to add here?
I don't know. I think a lot of it too, when I've asked people about this, they'll often go to the, oh, we hire like whoever is the most competent for the job. Like I've openly asked many companies like, oh, so what is your position for hiring women in this role? And they'll say, oh, we're totally open to any qualified candidate. And I feel like the unspoken thing behind that is, too bad there's not enough women who are qualified candidates.
Uh-huh.
And then the conversation ends.
Is this places where you've worked?
Yeah. I just find it interesting that that is even something people will say, period. Imagine anything else, right? Imagine being like, so why is this product so shitty? And it's like, well, it's as good as it can be for the time that we put into it. You know, it's just like, it's such a cop-out answer. And it's something that, you know, it doesn't affect their bottom line. So I don't know. I was not jumping in because honestly, I have a very negative view of this and I don't think it's going to get better.
Well, and that's, and to your point, right, that's, if you don't really want it, right, if the company in question doesn't really give a shit about diversity, even if you did go out and find the candidates, right, they'd look at them and they would find some other excuse, because their default
and I've had that
position,
a lot.
the thing that they actually, let's talk about jobs to be done for diversity, right? The job to be done for that is some sort of PR, you know, nightmare aversion, right? What is the least I can do? We see this with accessibility all the time.
Yeah.
What is the least I can do to get whatever that rating is so I don't get sued?
Right.
Right? That is not a company that gives a shit about accessibility. That is a company that gives a shit about not being sued.
That's right.
And to some extent, that does make the world a slightly more accessible place. But at the end of the day, they're always, the second they have a chance to not be accessible, the second they have a chance to spend the money differently, they will. A perfect example of this is environmental regulations. What is the sine curve, right, on the up and down and back and forth of environmental regulations over time, where it's this like, hey, we got this, you know, EPA thing passed. Okay, great. That's great. We're gonna abide by that, and then spend millions on lobbyists getting that thing revoked so we can go back to doing things the way we want to, right? As long as the companies are doing that, those sort of short-term solutions, I feel the problem is you're just constantly slapping on Band-Aids. Like the long, it's in the end, it always has to be about the long game of just the better companies surviving, right? And that long arc of history where it's like, oh no, actually the people who run these companies over here actually want the world to not fall apart, actually want to not pollute, and are actually looking for ways to pollute less, not ways to get around the regulations that are trying to make them pollute less.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, and until you get to that point, anything you do is going to be the whole game of, okay, I'm going to pretend.
I'm going to say something that won't get me in trouble, that won't really be an answer. That's kind of a cop-out response and not solve this problem. Yeah, I think until it actually negatively impacts the business to not hire more people. And there's a lot of talk right now, like, oh, well, if you include more people, your design solutions are better.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think businesses are that convinced of that. There's not a lot of case studies.
They're not even that convinced of human-centered design.
That's right.
They're not even that convinced of experience design. They still think that engineers are the people who should make the most money because that's the people who have been making them the most money.
Yeah.
Facebook just reported a profitable quarter.
Oh yeah, probably the worst public opinion situation they've had. They they like doubled or something ridiculous like that.
After all of the crap that they've done in the last year, after all of the shit that they actually got caught doing.
Yes.
And had to admit was true, they ended up having a really profitable quarter.
And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh, we have just told them, keep up the good work.
Exactly. I can't, man. Is there any solution other than burning it all down?
I get so tempted to burn it all down. But here's the funny thing. Here's the absolutely funny thing about burn it all down. That is another cognitive bias. One of the biases that I personally suffer from the most is called zero risk bias. Zero risk bias, basically, if you give someone, say someone, hey, we're going to give you this experiment. And in the experiment, there's a 5% chance that you'll receive a mild electric shock. But if you pay me $10, there'll only be a 1% chance. If you pay me $100, there'll be like a 0% chance. People will rather pay the $100 to get the 0% chance than pay the $10 to get the 1% chance, because the idea of being able to put something to rest and not even have to think about it is so comforting.
Is this like Ivy League Jackass, these examples?
Oh, there's this weird theater of cruelty that goes on with some of these like cognitive bias experiments because they're mostly done on college students. But but yeah. So for me, the whole notion of, oh, like this world can only be cleansed with fire, right? You read the comment section of something and you're like, oh my, or you hear just the latest shit Trump said and you're like, oh my God, this world can only be cleansed with fire. Like, what's comforting about that is the notion of like, you know, just nuke the site from space. It's the only way to be sure. Like everything is gone. I don't have to think about the hard work, right? Again, the slowed down, really thoughtful, difficult process of thinking, okay, let's untangle this. We're dealing with human beings here who elected him. Because even if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, these 60 million people who voted for him are still here, and there's 60 million of them, right? That's not something you untangle with a magic wand. That's like, no, you have to think thoughtfully about that, and you have to fight and continue to fight. We still have Nazis. They're back. We can't even hand wave that.
They're back and we're making money from them.
Yes.
We're actively courting them.
That's part of the reason
onto
they're
our
back.
platforms.
And the fact that you realize, like, who's this said, like, you know, the price of freedom is always being vigilant, something like that. I'm going to completely screw it up. But at the end of the day, it's like you realize, oh no, this isn't
Commander
a set it and
Sisko
forget it.
from Deep Space Nine.
There you go. There is no set it and forget it, which is like the most depressing and yet most invigorating thing to know. Is like, no, there is no burn it all down. Even if you were to burn it all down, you'd probably just create a whole new set of problems.
Yeah, that's like, where do you bury all those Nazis? That's
the letter from Birmingham jail. I recently did an episode about, because I wanted to do an episode just about the quote. We just had MLK Day, and there was a lot of conversation on social media about Martin Luther King is not here to comfort you, white people. He's here to confront you. And they would pull up these quotes that were like really confrontational, like, hey, white liberals are actually more of a problem for me than the KKK. And so I wanted to kind of unpack that, because there's actually a lot of cognitive biases to talk about there. And I'm like, oh, wait, where did that come from? Oh, the letter from Birmingham jail. I haven't actually read that. Let me read that. Oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I came to the party, 60 years late. But there's a lot in there. One of the things he talks about is there are two groups, two African-American, two black groups he was actually having difficulty with. One was sort of people who were either, moderates, or who basically had just become accustomed to segregation. Like, again, it was the default now, and it was easier to just live with it than to fight it, which it was. I mean, you risked dying. On the other side were militants who were like, burn it all down. We're out. Like, I literally don't believe in democracy. Like, and I have no evidence to believe in it. Just burn all of it down. Like, let's not engage with it at all. And he found either approach to be useless. Like, it wouldn't really solve anything. The approach he had, which was, and when I looked at that, I thought, oh, both sides kind of like have this zero risk bias thing of like, it's much simpler to say it can't be solved, or it's much simpler to say burn it all down. The difficult path is the middle path of saying it can be fixed, and it's going to be fucking hard. And that's what he was doing. And when you look at the strategy behind non-resistance, which wasn't just, okay, let's go in and have a sit. It's like, no, first we need to talk to the local government. First we need to assess what's going on, which involves talking to lots of people. Then we need to assess whether or not the local government is willing to actually work with us, which is a whole bunch more work. And then if not, then we have to go off and train. They would train for these things. very rigorously. And like, this is months of work. This is hard work. And it is so much easier to just say, let's just leave, right? Or let's just shoot people. Like, that is so much easier than, oh crap, there's actually a methodology to follow. There's actually all the stuff we need to do if we want to get things done. And so whenever I have those dark nights of the soul where I'm like, oh my God, I wish we could just burn it all down, I try to remind myself, yeah, but this is actually supposed to be hard.
Yeah, I'm actually really psyched in some ways that technology has started to break everything because it will force an examination of how we've been building things.
Well, yeah. And this is, like, to me, the exciting opportunity comes when I think about AI.
Yeah.
And this idea that we've trained AIs, like there's the whole thing where they trained an AI on Google Images and it started associating images of women with images of kitchens, or images of kitchens with images, and it's because of the data set, right?
Do you remember Google Photos?
What about them?
The gorilla problem?
Oh, yeah, right.
Do you know how they fixed that?
No.
They deleted gorilla as a category.
Yeah. See, that would be the lazy way out, right? But the opportunity there to me is, okay, it was training on, quote unquote, the real world. It was training on the data set of pictures that were actually out there, because the data set of pictures that were out there were created by humans who were sexist. What if we reversed that whole thing to say, well, if we wanted it to have it return a set that was A, more realistic, and B, not sexist, we'd have to think about a different data set, wouldn't we? Which means we'd have to all agree and say, well, what world do we want? That, to me, is the interesting opportunity. That, to me, is the moment, the even, dare I say, profit-driven moment, right? To say it's actually useful for us to sit down now and say, what do we want? It is very clear what we don't want. And we've become very good at talking about that. But at what point do we sit down and say this? We do it at every kickoff, right? As designers, what's the goal? What does success look like? We need to do that for, America. What does success look like?
Yeah.
Let me throw another wrench in the works.
Please.
We're talking about hard long-term solutions to a very difficult problem. And we work within an industry that thinks very, very, very short term.
Oh my, yes.
Very short term. Like, I'm investing $10 million in your company, and you have 3 years to turn that into $1 billion, or I walk.
Yeah.
And you're done. I sell you off for parts. So you're not thinking long-term strategy. You're thinking, I need to succeed so I can get this money, so I can get paid.
Yeah. And if that's all you want, like my advice to you, to be perfectly blunt, is go into drug dealing. It is a much faster way to make money, a much more surefire way to make money.
Really
like I don't understand why. And I get it. Like, I think a lot of people enter into the startup game.
It's recession-proof, too.
Yes. Oh, my God, yes. Either that or hedge funds, honestly, because even if there's a big, bank bust, you'll get bailed out. Like,
yeah, same.
The exactly, right? Like, if money is truly all you care about, there are so much better ways to do it than to sort of pretend to care about society and build something that's supposed to be useful and then use it to screw people over. Like, that's, and I get it that people come into that thing thinking, oh, I'm not here just to make money. I'm here because I have this great idea. Like, that's the myth. But if your approach to that is, and again, this goes back to cognitive bias, the pattern, right? The pattern we've seen since 2000 has been, you have a really clever idea and you raise a bunch of money and then the idea pays off and now I'm rich and I'm awesome, right? That becomes, people begin to think it's not even a choice. That the way you structure your business, you have no choice. You have to do it this way.
Right.
You have to find investors who are going to try to get 10x later. And they don't realize that, no, when you decided to structure your company that way, when you decided that was how you were going to make money, that was an actual choice. You had other options, but it may not even had occurred to you that you had other options. But there's all sorts of ways to structure your business. There's all sorts of ways to try to think of delivering a product, and not all of them involve 10x profit, but a lot of them still involve being human, providing something of value, and actually living pretty comfortably.
Dave, where else can we hear you go on about cognitive bias if I wanted more?
Sure. So I have a podcast that's called Wait for it.
What?
The Cognitive Bias Podcast.
No.
Because I was so imaginative when I named it. That was my own laziness, my own bias, was to call it the Cognitive Bias Podcast. So you can find that. And I, once a week, just drop a few minutes of, me blathering on about one particular bias, and we focus in on it for the 10 minutes or so. And then the next week we move on to another one.
That's fun.
And I can find that at the typical podcast places
all of
where.
yeah. It's on all the platforms now, even some that I've never heard of.
And if people should want to talk to you further or hire you even for doing things, where can they reach you?
Sure. So the hiring thing, I work for a very wonderful company called Think Company, and we do all sorts of wonderful work in the realm of experience design. And I do a lot of content strategy for them. And if you want to holler at me, I am at movie_pundit. That's at MOVIE_PUNDIT on Twitter. That's a simple enough way to find me.
Because, and this is something we didn't even have time to get into, he used to be a filmmaker before he got into all of this stuff.
Yeah, and I still try from time to time
They
to
buried the
make the
lead
movies. But yeah, that's where I started.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'll have to come on some other time when we can chat all about movies.
Ooh.
Lord, we could talk
That's
about
going to be
it.
a more fun, less sad podcast.
That'll probably involve alcohol and arguing.
Yeah.
You
As
don't-
with movies, it always does.
Yeah, you don't have good taste in movies.
What? That's just rude.
No, you like The Lobster. That's a terrible movie.
Oh my God. Can we
I
just
like The Lobster.
get over that?
I don't know if
Hated it.
I don't know if I enjoyed it, but I really liked it.
It's
Yeah,
a
exactly.
horrible-
I didn't
it's
enjoy it.
It's a horrible
Have you
movie.
seen The
I
Favorite?
liked it. So good.
Right?
Yeah.
Favorite is great.
Oh.
Lobster. I told you that. I'm fair. I am fair. The Favorite is a great movie. The Lobster sucked.
I get it. You're a man. You have the definitive taste.
Wow.
Tell me what movies to enjoy and like.
I'll tell you what to enjoy.
All right.
Yeah, I'll give you a list.
All right.
I'll explain to you why the list is good too.
Okay.
There.
And then explain how lists work. And then explain.
I don't think I would ever want to see The Lobster again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being someone where like all my friends are coupling up really fast and getting married, it was very satisfying. Perhaps you just don't remember
What?
this phase of your life.
No, all my friends are on their third marriage now
See?
because I'm
See?
so old, Larissa. But thanks for the millennial viewpoint on it.
Well, millennials aren't a thing. Not a thing.
How's Philly?
Philly's good.
We didn't even talk about the East Coast and the East Coast edition.
Can we talk about that Frank Rizzo statue?
Oh,
People
I don't
can't
even
hear
know.
that. Say that again.
The Frank Rizzo statue.
What about it?
When is it coming down?
Oh, God.
Well, I mean,
I honestly don't know.
how hard
because-
can it be to get rid of it?
Because in every other way, the city government is actually being surprisingly progressive, right?
Right.
They like I talk about like service design. They have straight up service design people. They are paying people good money to be full-time service designers and content. They are more content strategists than just about anyone else in Philly. Like they have their shit together when it comes to sort of being very thoughtful and progressive about that piece of the world. I have no idea how that
I didn't know that.
translates into a Frank Rizzo statue still being there. That is an excellent point.
It's shameful. It is shameful that it's there.
No, I don't know what to tell you, man.
We should just.
Like I see it being pulled and toppled down like the Saddam statue back in the day. Like
Oh
it feels
my
like something that
God,
should happen.
yes. And then tossed in the Schuylkill.
Yes.
God. Darkest fucking time in our history. And we build a statue for it.
We do kind of do that though, don't we?
Yeah, that's the thing.
We got a little statue problem. Yeah, we do.
I think I tweeted once, I will be fine with the Confederate statues staying up if and only if we also make a statue for every single slave who ever lived.
Oh, yeah.
You do that? Great. Keep all your Confederate statues. I'm happy.
Fair enough. Dave, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Thank
Same
you
for
so
me.
much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
What a nice guy.
Mm-hmm. And spent so much time with us. So
Yeah.
generous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
If you want to ask us something about this podcast, you can go to our Twitter, which is VODROCKS, VOD_rocks, ROCKS. I think you can also ask Siri to listen to this podcast. But
Really?
yeah, but I forget how it goes because I don't iPhone.
Also, I've never gotten Siri to work.
Yeah, but there's something where you can be like, Siri, play VOD. which is kind of cool.
I think Siri is how the NFL got Maroon 5 to play the Super Bowl. Because if you ask it to play something, it's always Maroon 5. And you're like, what?
What cognitive bias is that?
That's Siri's own bias. It's biased to Maroon 5, apparently.
By the way, Eagles still NFL champs today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
got one more day to enjoy that.
Yeah.
Wow. So sad for you.
Okay.
All right.
I don't know what's happening here. But tune in next week when we'll do something different than this week, I suppose. Hit the switch there.